Welcome back to the RPG Framework tutorial series. In this final tutorial, we'll be adding headshot mechanics to our bow and arrow system. We'll set up different effects for common enemies, where a headshot will instantly take them down, and for mini-bosses, where it will deal heavy damage without being a one-shot kill. On top of that, I'll show you how to configure a charge threshold, so only fully drawn arrows can trigger headshots. Let's dive in and complete the archery system with this finishing touch. We will start by adjusting arrow collision in the enemy blueprint. Select the capsule component and set it to ignore collisions with arrow objects in the collision settings. Now select the character mesh component and disable its collision. Lastly, select the skeletal mesh component and enable its collision by setting the preset to character mesh. This setup will move collisions with arrows from the capsule component to the actual skeletal mesh that represents our enemy in the game. Now go to the event graph and find the on-dead event. Here we need to disable collision for both the enemy character mesh and the capsule components. This will ensure that enemies who are already dead don't generate overlap events with arrows and cannot react to damage caused by arrows. Now open the character base blueprint and go to the archery graph. Find the on-arrow hit event. Here you can see that we hard-coded the arrow damage gameplay effect. This is the effect that causes health changes on an actor hit by an arrow. Now we are going to make this effect selection dynamic. One effect will be applied when an arrow hits the character's head, and another one will apply for the rest of the body. First, we need to detect if the arrow actually hit the character's head. To do this, I'm going to create a new function in the character base. This function should accept a reference to the arrow actor and return a boolean indicating whether the arrow hit the character's head. The implementation is simple. We will use a line trace by camera channel to check if there is a hit starting from the arrow's location up to 100 units forward. If there is a hit, we'll use the find closest bone function, passing the hit location as input. This function will return the name of the closest bone on the character mesh. Lastly, we just need to check if the returned bone name is equal to head and return that result from our function. Now that we have the function to recognize if the last hit was a headshot, let's move forward by creating the headshot gameplay effect. I'm going to create the headshot effect by duplicating the arrow damage effect blueprint. Instead of using the custom calculation class, we'll simply add a modifier to override the health attribute to 0. This will immediately kill the character. Now go back to the character base and create a new function that switches between the arrow damage effect and the headshot effect, depending on whether the hit was on the head. Lastly, go back to the on-arrow hit event and use the function we just created instead of the hard-coded gameplay effect. One more thing we need to do to make sure this works is to enable generate overlap events for the skeletal mesh component in the enemy blueprint. Now we are ready for a test. As you can see, when we land a headshot, it instantly kills the enemy. When another body part is hit, the regular arrow damage is applied. Right now, our player can also one-shot mini-bosses. However, this is not a common mechanic in RPG games. Instead, headshots should deal a higher amount of damage but not instantly kill. Let's see how we can support this. Create a new gameplay effect calculation blueprint for headshots as a child of the range damage gameplay effect calculation blueprint. Open it and override the get damage magnitude function. First, call the parent implementation, and then multiply the output magnitude by a float value. I'll multiply it by 10, which will ensure that headshots deal 10 times more damage than regular shots. Now we need to create a gameplay effect for applying the headshot calculation. Simply duplicate the headshot effect and assign the headshot calculation class we just created instead of the attribute modifiers. Lastly, go to the mini-boss blueprint and override the get arrow damage effect function to include the mini-boss headshot effect instead of the simple headshot effect. Let's test this now. As you can see, headshots no longer one-shot mini-bosses. One more thing you may want to handle is the charge intensity of arrows that can deal headshot damage. Right now, we are not checking it, which means even weak arrows can deal headshot damage if they hit the character's head. If you don't like this mechanic, we can simply fix it by adding a threshold based on arrow damage magnitude to our headshot check logic. As you may remember, arrow damage magnitude is the value we can use to measure how much charge was applied before launching. Damage magnitude can be between 0 and 1, where 1 means the arrow is fully charged. Here, I'm going to use a threshold of 0.7, allowing only nearly fully charged arrows to make a headshot. You can adjust this value to find what works best for you. Now let's make one final test. That wraps up our final tutorial in the Archery System series. Now we've added headshot mechanics with instant kills for regular enemies and high damage hits for mini-bosses. We also introduced a charge threshold, so only properly charged arrows can trigger headshots. I hope this gives you more depth and realism for your RPG combat system. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Special thanks for my Patreon supporters. Thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.